Action.
Hello, I'm Beth Landin, Executive Director of 171 Cedar Arts Center. I am here this afternoon with Valerie Goodwin. I'm very excited that she's with us today. Valerie is a mixed media, fiber textile artist and architect. So she's brought her work with her to 171 Cedar Arts Center for a solo exhibition. So I'm going to ask Valerie some questions. I had a chance to look at the work. It's absolutely stunning. And I'd just like to have you say a few words about the collection to start off.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. Well, in thinking about the collection, and I started looking at the dates of the pieces, for me it kind of chronicles chronologically where I went in my journey as a quilt artist. So it's kind of nice to see my work and reflect on it that way. And so the earliest work is 2008, and then it goes all the way to 2020. So it's really nice to have it in a small setting like this, so I can just see it as a body of work.
Well, and I think it's really interesting to see how your work has evolved over time. Because you started out with quilts that are quite traditional in nature, and you've moved on and you've got some new technology that you've woven, if I can use the term woven, into your work for the laser cut fabrics, which give your work a whole new dimension and sort of ethereal, lacy texture. Can you talk about the progression of your work?
Well, if I had not been a professor of architecture that happened to have a really fancy laser cutter available to me, I don't think that I would have kind of moved in this direction. So when we got one in our program, I looked at it and I decided for myself, there's something I can do with this related to my artwork. The students use it to make models and things like that, but I felt as though I could use it to cut fabric. And so I tested over 30 types of fabric and figured out which ones work best, what kind of backing works best, and then you have to figure out speed, frequency, and power.
Right.
So those are the things I had to experiment with. And so I enjoyed it because I got to use both sides of my brain, which is what we as architects are trained to do.
Of course, and as an architect, you solve problems, really. And with this kind of art, you are still in the process of doing that, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So I did have someone ask me about what sizing you use for your laser cut, because the fabric itself, or is that the type of fabric? You were saying different types of fabric.
Oh, you mean you want to know what type of fabric I use?
Yes.
Okay. I generally use, sometimes I use sports nylon, but most of the time I use a really tightly woven cotton or silk organza, and there's another product that is it's a fabric paper product. It's called Evelon, and it comes in white sheets and you can paint it. And so that works really well for opaque fabric.
And is it relatively stiff then to work with?
No, it's very soft.
Okay.
Yeah. And some artists use it, they wrap it around frames and they paint on it. It's really, really nice.
So you do get a certain quality to your work so that it hangs when you mount it on the wall. Is there anything special that you do to get the work to hang? I mean, you have different textures and different thicknesses.
Yeah, I have to be aware that the different fabrics have different properties. And in some, like the one behind you, most of the fabric is really just opaque fabric, so it's all one type of fabric. Whereas in other cases, it's got opaque fabric as well as translucent fabric. So you have to kind of be aware of how much stitching to put on it, things like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Well, and I learned to sew when I was 10 years old and started making garments and started making things and progressed a little bit into artwork. How did you start? I mean, you're an architect. Not all architects are as handy with a sewing machine as you are. How did you start?
I have to credit my maternal grandmother, who was a home ec teacher. I grew up in Connecticut, but every summer we would travel to Alabama and we'd stay for a couple of weeks. And one summer she taught me how to sew, and I started making Barbie doll clothes and clothing for my younger sisters. And so that's how I got started. But when I got to high school, you know, because of peer pressure,
Sure.
I sort of put it down. And then it wasn't until I got interested in quilting, and that was many, many years later, that I decided to start up with the sewing machine again.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So you teach workshops. Can you talk a little bit about the workshops, both in person and, of course, now in this COVIDian world, you've migrated to online workshops as well?
Yeah, I just retired. The last leg of teaching, you know, it just happened to coincide with when COVID started. So then immediately we all had to learn how to use Zoom, which was a real challenge.
Yeah.
And I have to say that was one reason I decided, since I could, I would retire early, because there were just so many challenges and I didn't feel like I could overcome them. But coincidentally, you know, the fiber art world, the quilting world, latched on to teaching virtually.
Right.
And so I've had to adapt my way of teaching, learn new technology, without losing some of the things that I want to teach people when I teach them in person. Because if you don't have that direct connection,
Right.
there's this veil between you and the student, which is the camera and the computer screen and so on. And so that's been an interesting journey.
Well, and I think as artists, so many of us have had to learn the technology as well as how our art evolves and how we've had to go virtual. And so Valerie's exhibition has been postponed twice due to COVID, and we are very fortunate to have her here now.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, we've gotten to know her a little bit, and we've had conversations about things like purchasing new equipment and how to do things and how to hang and how to ship and how it's a very different world than the original
It sure is.
conversation we had about your exhibition.
And to backtrack a little bit, you know, I think now kind of we're moving away from the COVID crisis.
Right.
So the question is, are we going to do hybrid teaching? Are we going to have hybrid experiences? Are we going to go back to the original way? Or, you know, what is going to happen? And my thought is that it's changed things dramatically.
It has, and I think time will tell whether we all fall back into old habits, but the great thing is access, because people who may not have had access to you and your workshops now do, because you don't have to travel there to teach
That's true.
the students.
That's true.
Terrific.
And I do a lot of lectures online, a lot of virtual lectures with guilds that normally maybe they couldn't afford to have me visit.
Right.
So I'm really busy doing that, and that's really nice to be able to connect with people that way.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you have woven history, background, place. The title of this particular exhibition is Pattern and Place, and you've woven all of those themes into your artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Has COVID changed your themes? I know obviously politically, some of your artwork is here today, that's been a change in the theme, but how has COVID shaped how you are looking at your artwork going forward?
Well, unfortunately, because of COVID and because of the kind of emphasis on doing things virtually,
Right.
I haven't really had that much time to get back into doing it. You know, I've developed online on-demand workshops and so on. So the back of my head, I'm wondering myself, where am I going to take myself?
Okay.
So I don't know. I can't really say. So we'll see.
Okay, so we will be watching. We'll be watching closely for Valerie and seeing how her work progresses. Valerie, how do we find you online, on Instagram, on Facebook?
Oh, yes. So you can find me on Pinterest, Instagram, and my website. They all have the words Valerie Goodwin Art, all one word. So you can find me that way.
All right, well, Valerie, we will look for you there. But meanwhile, come to 171 Cedar Art Center in the Houghton Gallery. Valerie's work will be on display through January 7th, 2022. Thanks for watching.